One of the big hurdles is the regulatory processes. So we're approving new medicines, often biotherapies, especially in the context of BioCanRx, that are individualized or at least more precisely delivered. And so they don't fit the same mold as classic sort of drug, right? And so we're all kind of scrambling, trying to figure out how do we determine if one of these things is safe and effective, but we can't really use the same benchmarks that we've always used in a lot of cases. And I think the scientists sort of know what those benchmarks should be, but we're constantly redefining them. So we need help from, the regulators and from each other to figure out how to really authentically, rigorously test these things in a new and novel system. And that kind of requires buy-in from health sector and the regulatory sector and the research center, as well as, sort of the funding agencies that can help us to support us to do those trials. A lot of the classic funding mechanisms are discovery-based and not necessarily to do the rigorous sort of slog of making sure everything is safe and effective and repeatable over and over again.
So right now in Canada, it turns out that only 4% of clinical trials being done in Canada are based on Canadian discoveries. And that's something that is a problem. So we're trying to be part of the solution by making sure that our discoveries, like our discoveries specifically that identify, can go into the clinic so Canadians can get benefit from the therapy. We're really good at discovering things. We've got really good universities and scientists, but there hasn't been much of a path forward for Canadian discoveries to go into the clinic in Canada, to make Canadian companies that stay in Canada, because a lot of things are being bought by Americans. So we're trying to sort of change the system a little bit. So I think it's really important to have programs like these ones by BioCan that allow Canadians to figure out how to do it for ourselves.
There's a lot of barriers to moving people between provinces for treatment. And this is felt very, very acutely in patients with relatively rare types of cancer. So it's been hard to do clinical trials on these rarer subtypes because accrual has been hard to meet targets. But you might have a patient in one province who would qualify for a clinical trial in another if only you could get that to play nicely. It has also been very hard. And it's discouraging as you're launching these trials to kind of find the right patient population. So if we had more agility in the way that we moved patients maybe, but probably more productively the actual products that need to be used to treat them around the country, I think that would get more patients better access to the precision medicines that they need in their particular indication. In Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada, something I'm very proud of is that they have figured out how to get the physicians licensed in the 4 provinces very sort of in a multidimensional sort of way, which gives all 4 Atlantic provinces access to the physicians and specialists in all 4 Atlantic provinces. So it can be done, and those cross-provincial barriers can be brought down, and I think we have a model of that in Atlantic Canada, so I think we have to do that more.
BioCan has done an amazing job of identifying a critical gap that no one was looking at, and it is not a sexy thing to do right now. It is really not, but my God, is it ever instrumental.
So in Canada, there's a lot of roadblocks in the preclinical to clinical translation, and some of them are just based on a sort of general lack of experience, lack of expertise. And that's not to say that there's none. It's just that there's not an abundance of it. So in Nova Scotia, nobody's done this sort of before in the cell therapy space. So we have mentors from BioCanRx and people that I can call up for advice. But we very much have to build that out. And most of us are doing this from positions in academia, but it's not our primary role. So in order to translate what we're doing on the bench, we need to find the bandwidth and the staff and the funding, not to mention the facilities and the support from our institutions to be able to do this sort of thing.
So it's multiple pillars all at once. So one is figuring out how to do it. And that's what BioCan really comes into play. Building the network which allows Canadians to work together to sort of strengthen their ties and fill in gaps that we don't really, that individual teams might not have, and we can help each other out. Or as Canadians, we can and should be doing that. Funding is also an issue. There are not enough Canadian sources of funding, whether that's venture capital or government-based funds. But it takes a village, and
Other major roadblock that we face is a financial one, fortunately. So we can get to phase 1, maybe to phase 2, but then we need partners to help us to go beyond that to the phase 3 trials and beyond, where our new therapies are being offered to patients. And we're doing all of this in the context of a publicly funded healthcare system. So what we really, really need in Canada is more buy-in or more support to kind of get from those academic discoveries into the clinic.